All right, so yes, now officially welcome everyone to this Astro Duet of today. And today we have Vanessa Montgomery, who has woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning to be here with us because she's in Australia.
Unbelievable. Yes, I actually stayed up. I tried to have a nap, but no, here we are.
I think it's amazing, yes. And then we also have George Coutts. I don't know where you are, George, now.
I'm in Lampeter right now.
Ah, wow, you're in Lampeter. Wow.
Mhm.
Still, it's a nice thing. Thank you for being here. Now it doesn't look like it,
Yeah, yeah, of
now.
course.
It's so easy for you.
I
Yeah.
stayed awake too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, nice. So basically, the Astro Duet of today is gender, sex, feminism, and astrology. And Vanessa and George will be speaking at the AA conference, and they are studying all of these themes, all of these subjects, and that's why we thought it would be nice to talk about this. Before we go into this, just to remind everyone that the AA conference is at the end of August, but if you book before the end of April, so you have 6 more days, you get a huge discount for the in-person conference. It's £200, and for the online it's 125. Of course, it depends on how many days you book. It's not as simple as that, of course, but all of the information it's on the website. I'm going to put the link in the chat box, so if you want to check later, you can go. Anyway, the website is astrologicalassociation.com. And also, in case you don't know, the Astrological Association is running a video contest. So basically, if you like doing videos, we invite you to prepare a video on the theme of the changing skies. And you can use AI if you want to use it. We just ask you to be creative as far as you can. And it doesn't have to be spoken. Maybe it's just images, whatever you choose. And the price is £250 if you win the first prize. So I think it's worth giving it a try. Yes. All right. So maybe we should start, Vanessa and George, with a little introduction of you two for the people who don't know you. So let's say a little bit about what's been your journey in astrology and how come you got interested in these ideas that we're going to discuss today. I don't know who wants to start.
George?
Okay, I'll let me take it away. Okay, hi everyone. So grateful to the Astrological Association for hosting this, and for Alejo for inviting me, and for Vanessa for being here. My name is George. I got my journey. I'm currently doing a PhD at the Sophia Center at the University of Wales Trinity St. David. That project is focused on sort of unpicking and unpacking the relationship between astrology and gender and sexuality. So the remit of the project is just to basically go through the astrological tradition or traditions, find moments where there are statements being made that are relevant to conversations that are happening about gender and sexuality, and sort of compiling them all together and sort of taking a view of what is actually being said in sort of the crossover between astrology and gender and sexuality. And that sort of was born out of my master's thesis that I also did at the Sophia Center. And that one, it was sort of a very similar theme, but the essential question there in that project was, is astrology used to challenge or uphold normative conceptions of gender and sexuality? And so maybe throughout the course of our conversation today, we'll sort of unpack some of the findings there. But I just sort of, I had a moment where I was like, this deserves a little bit more attention than a MA thesis can provide. So we've sort of extended it, and now we're sort of writing a whole 100,000 word.
Nice, thank you. And I think we lost you for a moment. I don't know. Am I the only one who lost him, or do you?
Frozen.
He's frozen. Yeah. Okay, maybe Wells. Okay, when he comes back, he can continue. And for you, Vanessa?
Okay, so I discovered astrology in 1995. So I guess I'm celebrating my 30-year astro anniversary,
Ah,
and studied formally in 2003. I began with astrosynthesis and Brian and Glennis.
Words on the subject, because there's lots to be said, I'm sure.
Oh, he's back.
George, you're back.
Sorry, I'm having issues with my computer here. It might actually make more sense for me to join from my phone. Um,
But now you're muted.
Now am I back?
Yes, you're back and we can
Okay,
hear
thank
you.
goodness.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So yes. So where did I pop up? Where should I hop back into this?
So, sorry, Vanessa, let's finish with George and we come back to you.
Oh, okay. Well, if Vanessa wants to finish, let's do that.
Okay.
Vanessa.
All right. Okay, where was I also at? So yes, studied formally in 2003, and like fairly early on started recognizing that things weren't landing right with gender, and specifically actually the myths is what I noticed. With gender, actually, I was looking back to one of my assignments, and I think I was calling Capricorn he, and I was corrected on that. There's a big she. I'm like, oh, humble beginnings here. But Brian Clark was one of my teachers, and he had studied mythology. I think he might have done a master's on it. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Like it's a real strength of his. And so I didn't know much about mythology. So he was using that to explain the astrology, but I didn't understand the mythology. So I'm quickly trying to catch up and put everything together. And I was already noticing that a lot of the stories were not empowering. They were quite disempowering to women, and there was a lot of sexual assault in them towards women and gendered violence. And I just thought, like, this is not very empowering for me. And I just sort of didn't really know what to do with that, but I continued on my journey because, we're all here for the same reason. We love astrology. It's so rich, it's so useful, it's such a great framework. And just as I went on, I started just sort of digging around a bit more and putting into my own practice, a more positive spin, and just sort of built that in as much as possible, and sort of coming across things and turning it around just in from what I had learnt as well. We're constantly coming across things and realizing, oh, that's not probably the best way to say that or frame that, and just starting to turn it around from just the rote learning that we have done. And over COVID, I think it was all the planets in Capricorn. A lot of people got into the traditional astrology, I think that ancient side of things. And I went more down the path of looking further into the history of where everything comes from and what was Greece and Rome like, the places that really formed the astrology that we're using, and a lot of the ideas and the names of the deities. And then, well, where did it come from before that? So that's really been my journey, putting it all into my own practice, and also a really strong visual side, which is why I think I ended up getting book deals. So I've got 3 books out, and it was just that practice doing a blog, adding, fashion and art images to it, and using a bit more of a contemporary speak without leaning too much into the technicalities, like thinking about what if a general sort of layperson came in to read my blog, I don't want them to be completely confused by another language. I want to sort of welcome them in and do more of the heavy lifting with translating. And so here we are. One thing led to another, and still on the path.
Nice. Yes. So you're both welcome. Thank you so much for doing this. And so I want to ask you, do you agree, George? Do you find also this that there are these stories or this kind of backdrop from astrology that might sound disempowering to women?
Certainly. I think one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about as I'm sort of going through the tradition is just the cultural relativity of the stories that come out through the astrological tradition, right? I think a lot of what I've found sort of through my master's work was that astrology and the astrological statements belong to the astrologers who make those statements. And so it really depends on the astrologer's intention for using the story. Like the things that come out through the astrological tradition depend on the astrologer's particular lens for like using astrology. So even I heard in Vanessa talking about how she sort of brought her own sort of like visual interest into the way that she talks about astrology. And there was something very important about like needing to speak to an audience that wasn't necessarily like full of astrological sort of masterminds. Like her astrology is like is a product of like, you know, the astrological tradition, but then also her intention for using astrology. And so I find that there are certainly lots of statements made through the astrological tradition that are disempowering towards women. But I think that I don't know whether or not that belongs to astrology or that belongs to an astrologer who might not, I don't want to throw out two big words, but, you know, a misogynistic astrologer is going to produce misogynistic astrology at the end of the day, I think. So that's where I kind of come down on that.
Yeah. So potentially astrology could actually be used to empower women.
Of course. And I think we're seeing that. I think that's a big part of what's happening on social media right now. I think like we're seeing astrology used for, you know, like there was like talk now about social media as sort of queer astrology, but then also you see the works that are coming out of the 70s and 80s under the banner of feminist astrology. I think there's a very clear precedent for, you know, feminists coming in and taking up astrological vocabularies and using the astrological system to advocate for feminist causes. Asteroid Goddesses is one of my favorite sort of examples of this, like of astrology being used very explicitly for like a feminist argument. So yeah, I think the person who is authoring the astrology is something that is indispensable when we're having a conversation like this.
Yeah, I'm curious. Caroline, I see you have a question, but sorry, give me just a minute. I'll ask this to Vanessa and then we'll go to your question or your comment. So having heard George, Vanessa, I wonder, what things do you do? Like, do you consciously do to avoid being an astrologer who disempower women?
Well, I guess, you know, it comes to identity. Which story are you actually going to take personally and perhaps identify more with? So I'm going to recognize where all the places that, you know, I've pushed against in my life that is also being reflected in the astrological framework. So, you know, you've got this idea that out of all the planets that we use, the main ones, we've got Venus and the moon, the girlfriend, and the nurturer, the carer is female, and the rest are male. So if I see myself in that, you know, I think we easily project into, you know, I can see the sun, the Mars, the Mercury, all the things I can relate to. But then I hear so many astrologers still say like about the sun, he, the king, and you know, it's all very male. And where do we see ourselves in that? You know, I think it is built into a lot of the representation that this tradition has come to us as a package. And it's really up to us to update that, which is a lot of shifting because we learnt it a particular way. That's how I find it anyway. I've really had to turn that around. And you know, it's interesting. George is like, I was wondering if he would be doing this or you would be doing this, George, collecting examples. And I think that's quite a lot of work, and it can be quite, you know, they say like, you know, laborious or labor intensive because it's not nice to read sometimes. And it's something that I consider doing, starting to every time I hear something, which is so often, or read something, jotting it down. I'm actually, I guess in what I'm doing, I'm trying not to actually throw any other astrologers like under the bus with it, because I would hate that to happen to me. I think we all hark back to Liz Green. But apart from that, because of, you know, the gender sort of framework and stereotypes, plus, you know, as a gay person, the other level of it, which it was so homophobic, you know, towards men. She probably didn't even mention lesbians, but, you know, I'm still going to catch that, whereas maybe a straight person reading that's not actually going to catch it as much. I'm not sure. These days, perhaps so. So, yeah. Anyway, what do you think, George?
What do I think about there's so much to say. What's do you have a more specific question just for me to focus my?
Yeah, I guess you know, for us, like rolling what we're talking about with sort of the gender stuff into, for me at least, it's the compulsory heteronormativity of it all. You know, it's sort of the same thing, and it just sort of layers on top of what's already there for me,
Mhm.
and you can't really separate them with the way that all of this is being used.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to think about, just the stories that we come into astrology with. And again, I think this is sort of what I was pointing to when I was talking a little earlier about the position of the astrologer being like really essential in the astrology that ends up becoming produced. Just because, when we're looking at modern astrological textbooks, and by modern I mean the stuff that kind of comes filtered through the 1800s up until like relatively recently, we're having conversations with astrologers authoring who are living in a very sort of like heteronormative social matrix. And so if astrology is the astrologer's tool for navigating the world that they're living in, they're only really going to have the eye to bring in the stuff that they're seeing from the world that they're living in. And so if they're not living in a world where queer timelines are visible to them, or queer interpretations of ancient myths are available, then those are just not going to get included. And I think we're at a point now where we have so much text to get through that it seems like, because those queer timelines aren't sort of like documented in the core texts that astrologers use to teach astrology in the modern day, it seems like they're not there. But if you really sort of like pick back and go far into the astrological tradition, there's a lot of like very queer, non-heteronormative stuff happening. There's like, even in like the foundational text, like Ptolemy talks, like he has a chapter called On Diseases of the Soul, where he talks about like different modes of sexuality that like now when we're talking about astrology and sexuality, we're like, oh, okay, well, like our current understanding of sexuality is that you're straight or you're gay, or like maybe you're bi, or whatever have you. And so the astrology sort of works the way that we're taught to view sexuality. But then when you crack open sort of the historical way of talking about and conceiving sexuality, you see in the astrological texts that there's a lot of sort of like non-heteronormative queer stuff that's baked into the tradition. It's just translators and modern publishers haven't had the eye to draw that out to the point that we're seeing queer timelines as a part of the story that's been happening through history. And again, I think I came here today with a mission to sort of open up a conversation about the importance of like not only understanding what's being said in astrological texts, but understanding who is the person saying the things behind the astrological texts being written. Because I think that's sort of where this conversation about what is gender and sexuality in astrology doing, like we have to maybe not talk to astrology, but talk to astrologers, if that makes sense.
So, looking at the cultural context that they were
Cultural
living
context.
at the time, like
Yeah.
Liz Queen.
Yeah, well, but she's a perfect example, right? She wrote Relating, which is the book where I sort of like found myself sort of like shaking my fist at the things being written. Only 4 years after homosexuality was taken out of the DSM. So and at that point in history, in the late 70s, like we were still sort of conceptualizing of homosexuality, even though the major psychological association sort of was beginning to remove itself from this idea, but we were treating non-heterosexuality as pathological still at that point. And I think like you only sort of start to see the tradition sort of like lightening up on these sort of like psychological takes once we get further and further away from the main way of talking about sexuality being like sort of related to some sort of psychological neurosis, which I mean, we have lots of evidence now to sort of suggest that like we don't necessarily know exactly where this is coming from, but like let's totally deprogram this sense that there's some sort of like illness at the root. But yeah, I think again, like it's like Liz Green has done so much good stuff for astrology, but I think at the end of the day, she's a product of her time.
True.
Yeah, good point.
Which that makes me think of, you know, back to this idea of, can we use astrology without gender? Like if you do that as an experiment, I think that could be quite interesting for people. Can you speak without using gender as shorthand for different ideas and just explain what you mean?
Yeah, how would
Yeah.
you do that? How would you do that?
How would I do that?
Yeah.
I just won't use gender. Like
Yeah.
I'll just use, you know, if we're talking about Mars, what is the archetype of Mars? What are you talking about? You're talking about assertion, energy, etc. You don't have to say masculine, because I'm also thinking about, you know, if you say masculine or feminine for all of these things, it's actually not saying that much, because you're saying masculine for what? Mercury, masculine for the sun, masculine for Mars, masculine for Saturn. It's not very descriptive, actually. So if you say what those archetypes mean, just say describe, rather than, yeah, gender is shorthand. That's sort of what I've boiled it down to ultimately. So that's what I'll do. And I really try not to say feminine or masculine as well. And just to back me up, in case my word's not strong enough, I actually found a video with Richard. Is it Richard Tarnas?
Yeah,
Richard.
Rick Tarnas, yeah.
Yeah, and his daughter, talking about the sun and moon. And in that, he says it's best not to gender the sun and the moon, because if you say masculine, the fact is we do apply that to male. And if you say feminine, I mean, that's where it's from, is female. That's what it means. And an argument that, like, I always notice the arguments that people respond to me with when I talk about this stuff. And they're usually always the same thing. And so one is like, oh, I don't see masculine as male or feminine as female. And he's countering that as well. And he's saying, well, that is what it is. And that's what people think of. And I'll add to that, I think about, you know, Jung came up with anima and animus. Like for men, the inner feminine, for women, the inner masculine. I hear people now say, oh, you know, my masculine side, or my inner masculine, or my masculine side. Like it's not the core, it's something else if you're a woman. But the fact is, it's all the same thing, you know, without that, there's no split. It's just been forced on us to disassociate and not be able to embody these things. So yeah, I think it's actually perhaps a good practice, even beyond an experiment, to try to stop doing that, because people do associate it. That's just how we are. And I think it would be really interesting to find some studies around that. I did see one that was, I've got to find it again. It was something to do with applying for advertising a job, because they were trying to see if women would apply equally if the job was just gendered to men, or in brackets, and women. And even when it was in brackets, women weren't applying, and then they took the gender off. They either took the gender off or said both, and then it was equal. So the fact is, we do identify if it says the gender or feminine or masculine. Like, good luck if you can get beyond that. That's brilliant. But we're human, and that's how we've been coded, I guess. So we've got to find workarounds, I think, to sort of get past it.
Yeah.
I love what you said about the masculine and feminine in astrological context anyway being shorthands, that like we can sort of like pick like shorthands for other things, and that like masculine and feminine, like if you really think about it, like aren't actually very descriptive of what we're often trying to talk about when we use them. I think that's I've not heard that put that way. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think it's quite lazy, and it can perhaps reveal, like if you try not to use them, it can reveal maybe that you need to work harder at being able to actually interpret and translate the astrology.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I love that. That's
so
great.
with all my thinking, that's really what I've boiled it down to, being able to express it that way in a line.
Yeah, I think that's really important.
I like it.
Nice, great.
Yeah.
And I don't want to stop the flow you have, but Caroline had a question. I don't know if you still have it or a comment, or if it's just we went too far now.
Well, we've gone a long way ahead of what I was saying, but I was getting really cheesed off with this idea of misogyny and astrology. I've been around as a radical feminist, I'm quite acutely tuned into misogyny, and I've been around in astrology for a long time now, and I've only ever come across one astrologer. He was quite a famous one, books, etc., older than me, but then that would fit. There actually was what I would call misogynistic, and so much so that I made sure I never watched him again. Potentially one other, uncertain, but really only one I would actually definitely say was misogynistic. And I was really quite surprised to find him giving the lecture, which is quite a while ago now, especially for the group that was doing it. And I have obviously found quite a lot of sexist astrologers in the older, quote, white, unquote, age group of the USA, because they come from their time and place, and sexism when they were brought up was just pretty well, there. And to some extent, they don't notice it. But by and large, I don't see it affecting their astrology. And mostly they're actually really quite nice people, or, trying to be pretty decent human beings. And I really question this whole idea in connection with astrology, because the one thing that I really like about the astrological community is it is so full of kind, decent, genuinely good people with good values, and very much away from, a random selection of the population at large. They are primarily a sort of a self-picked bunch,
Yes, I agree. I think
and I think within that context, I find it very difficult to conceive of misogynistic astrology. I mean, yes, obviously, a lot of the ancient myths, they come from their time and place, and ancient Greece was very pro-homosexuality and very anti-women. I mean, that's just the way it was. They thought the most important relationship was between a man and a man, and in a lot of places, and that's just the way it was. But I've always felt that Mercury wasn't particularly masculine. I've always felt that that was the homosexual, gay, or lesbian or queer representation in the cosmos. And when it comes to feminism, I think there have been, obviously not traditionally because they didn't know about them, but I think since the 1800s, there have been quite a significant number of female versions floating around, with Juno, Vesta, Pallas Athene, and
yes.
I've forgotten the series. And Ceres is definitely very strongly very female, matriarchal, and I would say quite feminist in the way she is. This is just how I see it. So I think it's very easy when you come from sort of normal society to look at things and to say that, yes, normal society has got a lot of blindness and doesn't appreciate things. That's true. But I really question the extent to which this is true in a very self-picked and rather unusual population of astrologers. You do get sexism, but you don't get misogyny. And by and large, I think it's more I mean, I would say it's more the way the men relate to the women within the astrological conferences and talks, rather than in how it comes through in their own astrology. And I think there's quite a distinction there,
Yeah.
if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Thank you for saying.
How you delineate is one thing, how you relate socially is another. Not listening to women is common right across the board, unfortunately.
I mean, for
But you
sure.
know, when you're doing astrology and you're delineating and things like that, you know.
Yeah, and of course, we're not here to judge the moral quality of any astrologer. I don't think any of us meant
No, that
like saying this astrologer is not nice, this astrologer is good, this astrologer is evil. I think the point is exactly that as astrologers, we relate to astrology from our own perspectives, and depending on our own experience of the world, I think this is the point that we're making, that depending on our own experience of the world, how we're going to engage with these symbols and how we're going to create an interpretation, right?
100%. And it just because I think I might have been the person to bring up the word misogynistic into the
Yeah, you were.
into the yes, yeah. So I'll clarify my point because I think you're right. I think by and large within the astrological community, I think there's the misogyny doesn't necessarily seem to be, as you say, like a rampant issue. My point that I was saying there was just that the question that I was responding to was, like, is astrology like specifically empowering towards women? And I said it can be used to that effect based on
Well,
what.
that's true of everything.
100%, 100%, 100%. And I think if you're bringing your perspective, if you're bringing a perspective that's geared towards empowering women into your astrological practice, then I think that astrologer's astrological practice will be empowering towards women. And my bringing up misogyny into this conversation was to sort of round out the spectrum there, as so to say, if your intention for using astrology is underlied by a misogynistic perspective on the way that gender works, and so your perspective sort of like influences the way that you're practicing astrology, then astrology could also be used to that effect as well. So I don't think that there's anything sort of like inherently.
But I would say that all the real astrologers, by and large, aren't like that.
Yeah, it
And
was
I
just
think the
random.
trouble is there are a lot of new ones on the internet, and a lot of them are doing very fluffy stuff, very woo-woo.
Yeah, okay.
And a lot of people, yes, are possibly misusing it. But if you're talking about real, genuine, proper astrologers, the sort that I listen to and mix with and so on, I think by and large that isn't there. And I would say, in fact, astrology has empowered a lot of women, particularly from my generation, to become really powerful characters and to be able to express their feminism very strongly, precisely because I think on the whole the astrological community is very tolerant, but it's not tolerant in a conscious, deliberate way. People just are tolerant.
Yeah, of course. I don't want to divert too much now.
I will let you get on with it.
Yes, but thank
it was
you.
important.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. And so I'm reading here from the chat some comments, and Emil is saying Limbell takes the viewpoint that the moon not necessarily represents the mother, but the person the child is attached to. So I think, I don't know, Emil, if you want to unmute and kind of.
Yes, I can.
Because maybe you want to make a point more clear. I don't know what
Yes.
you.
I think the non-gender related is already much more in conscience of the most astrologers. I took my exam with Lindell, and she gave me a chart not telling me anything. And of course, I said the mother was in the 10th house, the son, and the father was in the 4th house. And I could understand at what point she was right, because my ex-husband brought up my child. He was at home, I was at work. And she gave me a chart exactly in that kind of configuration. So she made a point, I don't make that mistake anymore. Don't take the social concept. I ask. I saw a presentation of Rick Levine, where he talked about the concept of the lion, the sign. And he said, the most of the times they explain it as the male lion. But it's not only a male lion. The male lion is, I'm the biggest. But the woman lion, she is taking care of all the organization. And I have an ascendant lion, and I agree 100% what he was telling. So I think it's much more extended, not in question of gender, but of energy and neutrality. And that's, I'm not in one gender or in second gender, whatever. It's like, I'm sorry, I only have Astro All-Star. I forget Vanessa.
Vanessa.
I do the same as you do, going back to the energy and not to the gender related. It's not even positive or negative. The only thing what's important in my opinion is it extrovert or introvert? Does it express itself or doesn't it express itself? That's what I put on the table, and then the customer gives an answer. Yeah, I recognize it.
Yeah.
So that's I don't even talk about anima or animus. Introvert, extrovert, that's all. It's the power goes out, the power comes in.
Yeah.
How do you digest your lesson? So that's not at all gender related. It's a question of energy. And I think that's what you tried to point it out. I agree completely, is that.
Yeah, exactly. I'll give a little example of, where it can be problematic if you do gender, and like how to, we do live in this reality in this world. So we can speak to that as astrologers and counselors or writers, or, putting our work out there. I was getting a lot of millennial straight women for a while there. And I remember one, and this kept happening, but one specifically, her natal sun was in the 10th house. So that's her sun. She's shining, and she was doing, what women are taught to do from, obviously things are changing, but we've still got a long way to go, I guess. So she was projecting that sun onto her male partner. And wondering why relationship's not working, and I said, look, this is your sun, you're meant to shine. This is a very vocational, it's very seen. Like, what are you doing with your career? And she was just making choices that supported her partner's best interest, and things weren't working for her, of course. So I just kind of call these things out pretty directly and just say, you've got to, if you made these choices for yourself, what would that look like? If you centered yourself, what choices would you be making that are different? And I just said, this is a gendered thing, and this is what society expects, and you've just sort of probably internalized that, maybe not really even considering it. And I'm here to say, switch it around. And she really did, I commend her for that, because not everyone does. They really surprisingly don't, but she really did. She really took it on. She was very clear about what she actually wanted and her creativity and where she wanted to go with her public persona, with all of that. And she did it. And that was amazing. But I've had women just sort of, they'd rather sort of turn away and go back to what they were doing. They can make that choice, but they've got to, it's such a clear, strong choice to go either way. It's like, the bros are talking these days about the red pill and the blue pill, like from the Matrix, and you can apply that idea to this as well. That's what I've found.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah. And Caroline is putting in the chat, I agree also. She's saying we still have a long way to go. Things are getting more difficult today for women. I sometimes feel like because there was a huge advancement some years ago, there was this feeling like, yeah, it's done. Equality has been reached. You can go to work. And it was an illusion that equality has been reached just because now women can work. It's like, it's so ridiculous.
Completely, and it's often not equality, often not freedom, often absolutely the opposite.
Yeah. So
But
yeah, there's still a long way to go.
I agree with you, but the question in the beginning, I always come back to, it's not a question of being a man or being a woman. It's being a human being.
That's right.
That's where I bring them back. And then I question why in your behaving, maybe you can switch something like you said, not only for women, but for men also.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
You can have a man with sun in Libra, moon in Pisces, and an ascendant in Cancer. So it's not a male man. But nevertheless, how can he empower himself? And the empowerment is you are a diplomat. That's empowering. You are capable to put the right words. So for me, the moon is not negative, and the ascendant is not negative, and the sun in Libra is not negative. It's how to use the power what's in it. And that's not related to sex. And I think you did exactly the same way as I did. I'm not feminist at all. Never was, never will be. It's a concept what doesn't fix in my head. I'm a human being first. I have to point that out. You can't go on the right way if you put yourself not in the right place first.
Thank you, Emil. Thank you for sharing this. And Vanessa, I was curious to ask you if you use the asteroids like Ceres, Pallas, and all of these asteroids, or if you don't.
Not really. I'll take the sun, thanks. I'll take the main planets that we can see and use and just open that up. I think that it's interesting that the asteroid goddesses has been, really leapt upon and embraced. And I think that just shows that sort of need for women to see ourselves. And rather than think, oh, let's just bring it back to the sun, which is how I think, it's like, oh, I'll take that speck out there rather than nothing, thanks. Or maybe that's just how I'm seeing it, but that's what I've seen. And I think it's definitely played its part and given women something to identify with. And this is a huge conversation about identity and gender identity, with what you will be seen as, what other people will see you as, and what you internalize and see for yourself. Which is why I want to get the gender out of there, because that's what happens. So I'm just, one of my books is on the sun, and I'm just saying, I'll take the sun. The sun doesn't represent men or masculinity. It represents your ability to shine.
Yeah.
And represents you.
Sorry, Vanessa?
It represents you.
Yeah. And George, did you research the play that asteroid goddesses have in the decisions of the soul and all of these things?
Yes, I do. I spent a lot of time with that book just because it's one of these moments where very clearly in astrology we see an astrologer sort of making a very sort of explicit claim that this astrological work is in service of participating in a social movement towards gender parity. Because one of my favorite things that Demetra George and Douglas Block do in the text is they have sort of the main significations for each one of the asteroids, and then they have a side column right next to those significations that say this is sort of how these asteroids are, even though they're feminine asteroids, we're talking about very sort of explicitly female archetypes here. There is a way, and there's a whole section for each asteroid that talks about how the asteroids in men's charts push are there to sort of push men to sort of forego these expectations that are put on them by sort of the social conceptions of masculinity, and sort of, I know that she says something like Ceres in a man's chart is there, or is there to reflect some sort of signification about how he can sort of like take a role in the raising of his own children, and how he could be an equal participant. So where we look to Ceres in a man's chart is where we find his sort of responsibility to sort of forgo what's been said about, you know, the mother being the person responsible for raising children, and actually, you know, as a man, take on his sort of responsibility to participate like very directly in child rearing, which is, you know, like typically associated with women's work, so to speak. So the work is very much so trying to say like, hey, listen, like the asteroid goddesses are here, gender parity is happening, and men and women all have to participate in this movement. And I think it's a very, very fascinating sort of text for talking about sort of feminism and astrology, and it's very interesting. And I have an asteroid right on my ascendant, so
Which one?
Vesta.
Ah,
Very.
so
Yeah,
nice.
she's right on there. So I think about her a lot.
I think it's interesting to see like if there's something right on an angle. I must say I looked up, you know, sometimes I do look things up. I really don't use them much at all, but sometimes I look up random ones, and I have Medusa bang on my MC,
Oh my
and
goodness.
Athena is closer to my ascendant. And I'm just like, yeah, we're going to rewrite that Medusa myth right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
you know why I ask this? Because sometimes I feel that bringing these asteroid goddesses, I sometimes feel it creates more polarization, because it's feeding the idea that there are female archetypes and masculine archetypes. So I personally am more interested in, like Vanessa's approach, the idea of perhaps trying to kind of let go of the idea of masculine and feminine archetypes, and just thinking of archetypes as functions. And yeah, and I feel like sometimes adding these asteroid goddesses to counterbalance the masculine archetypes, I feel that instead of creating more integration, but I must confess I haven't read the book, so this is pure
Homework for you.
yeah. But I feel it's more from when I've been talking with people who use the asteroids. I feel like sometimes it's creating more of a split instead of more communication. That's why I was curious to see your points of view, yeah, on this.
I have to say that's interesting that you say that, Eleo, because actually that's what I was thinking through this conversation. I was thinking this sort of reinforces this whole idea, actually, even though that is an amazing book, well worth a read just for the research, and Demetra George is amazing. But yeah, maybe we've moved on from there and can somehow integrate them in a different way. But
Okay,
still remember, I'll just say they're still remembering that we don't live in an equitable world yet, and we haven't gotten past that. So you still have to contextualize, like I was saying with that client. You know, I could recognize where she was with all of this and speak to that, and then go to where she is and take her sort of past that, and then she has to do the work or choose not to.
Yeah, sorry. The thing that I've sort of been inclined to say is something that I think that Vanessa, you just you took it right out of my mouth. There's just the idea that there are kind of two projects that are kind of happening at the same way. There's one where we're imagining how we can move forward in the astrological tradition without sort of nailing in gender more than it already is. But then there's another sort of retrospective sort of like, where are all of these gender conceptions? Where is the gender shorthand coming from? Which I think is work that is still sort of very much so in need of doing, because I think like it'll only help us move forward together if we understand precisely the moments where and the people who sort of brought all of this stuff together in the first place. And then like I just think in terms of like if we look at the project like loosening tied knots, Like we have to, we have to know what the rope is. We have to know who tied it. We have to, do you know what I mean? But then again, once the rope is free, we can use it for whatever we want to. And I think that's sort of, they're kind of two, it's the Janus sort of like both looking back and looking forward at the same time. I think there's a important line that we're towing here.
I
Yeah.
agree with that. Like over COVID, how I was saying, I was really looking back, like I needed to do that and it really helped. And I think you're doing things more thoroughly, but that was just like, I was taking very large, it's huge. It's so huge. And there's so many different stories and people chiming in, and it's massive. So thankfully the whole world locked down for a few years to go over it, just to get an idea and the context. And then, well, where did that come from? What was before that? Where did this all begin? It's a lot.
Yeah. But we gotta, and this is why astrology is good, right? Is that like, it's in a lot of ways future focused. We're looking forward to sort of what we can expect, but we also like it's got the whole story of the past sort of encoded into like there's obviously, you look at astrological interpretation to interpret the past and astrological cycles, that's fair. But then also like the down to the studs, like the methods that we use in astrological interpretation also teach us something about the way that humans have tried to sort of understand the cosmic effect that is sort of taking place on Earth. So we got to do both. We got to be thinking about the world that we're living in, which again is still sort of wrapped up in this conversation about gender. There's kind of like we can't not be speaking about it because it's ever present in the lives of the people who are living today. It's like it's why I always, because I'm not so much an astrological practitioner. I'm more of a researcher. Most of my stuff happens through my academic projects, but I talked to a bunch of astrologers who find the sort of removal of gender from the astrological practice kind of a difficult thing, because it doesn't necessarily account for the fact that like people are having like gendered experiences. And so to remove gender from the astrological conversation, I think like it is valuable because it accomplishes a lot of this work that we're talking about in terms of deprogramming and actually becoming like more eloquent in the language that we're actually trying to speak, and we're actually describing the things that we're meaning to say instead of just saying, oh, man, woman, masculine, feminine. But there is like when we talk about people's like expectations that are put on people based on gender, like there's the astrology has to have a mechanism for sort of carrying out that conversation in the language that it's happening.
Yes.
If that makes any sense.
It makes sense. And I think like what you're saying, we're talking about gender now because it's becoming so relevant now. So it's true that it's unfair perhaps also to expect, like I think going with what Vanessa was saying, we still haven't got to this moment in which gender is not important in our lives. And to pretend that is the case, it would be, in my opinion, to ignore like how many people are suffering because of this gender thing. And I'm talking about women, I'm talking about transgender people, intersex people, and how, depending on how we define all of these things, what it means, it's such a complicated conversation. And so we cannot just say, no, there are no genders. We're kind of...
Can I jump in and say something, Alejo?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I also think it's really important to see, everything that we are is a reflection of outer society, and which is, still full of sexist and very binary constructs. So we're sort of held hostage to that. But I think it's really important that we're also from a community that's very aware, invested. We want to be more aware. And I think the first thing is to also look at ourselves, and keep checking ourselves. And that's where things make a difference. I mean, I've worked in a lot of feminist areas. I do diversity training, and yet I still have to check myself. It was only the other day that there were 2 babies, and I could see everyone, including myself, change the tone of when you speak to a little girl baby and when you speak to a little boy baby. And I had to check myself, and I thought, this is really terrible that I'm raising the octave of my voice when I speak to a girl child, and I'm lowering it when I speak to a boy. this is part of being aware. And I think we're a great community for being aware. We just have to keep going, but realizing we're reflective of so many larger, very gender biased, social constructs, which we're going to fight. We're going to fight, for quite a while. But it's about awareness, I think, personal awareness, which will feed into the consultation, into the research, whatever.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks so much, Wendy, for saying that. And I think it's an
Sorry,
amazing. No, I think it's an amazing comment to actually close the Astro Duet. We're on time, and I think it's a wonderful recognition, like you're saying, yeah, that this is a community that is doing its best, and that we all need to do our own, check up on where, because we are part of this culture. Yeah, totally. Yeah, nice.
100%.
So I don't know, George, Vanessa, before we say goodbye, if there's anything else you wanted to share or comment, or if you have something that you want to say before we say goodbye?
Yes, I mean, we've only got 3 minutes, but I did want to bring up, something that early on I heard by someone that's, a very well-known astrologer, I won't say who, was actually trying their best to be respectful and include same-sex relationships. And they were saying that, Venus is female, and they were just sort of tying themselves in knots, trying to fit this in a different way, just being seeing things as heteronormative, that Venus is the woman and Mars is the male in the relationship and charts and synastry, and then trying to put two male charts together. And I was just thinking, well, I wish I could tell this person, just read it as, Venus is both of what they're attracted to. Mars is like how they go about it. It's the same thing. It just maybe is different if say a woman is rejecting her and not leaving her Mars and projecting it onto the guy. If they're straight, maybe that happens a lot more. I just wanted to bring that up. That really hit me when I started hearing things like that, because, if we're gay, we can code switch into the dominant, heteronormative reality. I'm female, I can code switch into reading things that aren't centered around me. And I think that's something that we can bring to astrology as queer people as well, which is that different perspective and spotting these things and saying, oh, hang on, that's not fitting. How can we do this in a way that's actually inclusive, and not seeing people as all different? Like, we all have a chart, Venus, Mars, like they're for us to own. And part of that journey to wholeness is we can use astrology for as a framework, actually, in that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. Thank you. George, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, or you have, or are you okay? Do you feel satisfied with what you've shared?
Yeah, I feel satisfied. I'm really grateful for the conversation, and for Vanessa and for you, Alejo. It's been really fun.
It's been amazing having you both. George, you're not doing you're not doing consultations, right?
No, not at the moment.
Okay. So Vanessa, if somebody wants to reach you for a session or something, can they do?
You can find me at astroallstars.com. That starts with a Z, and you can book in for a session with me. You can pick up my books wherever good books are found. And of course, you can come and see my 2 lectures this year live in person at AAGB, which I'm so excited to deliver and meet everyone in person. I've known Alejo for so long digitally, and we've never met. I get to meet Wendy. George, are you speaking live or online?
I'll be there. I'll be there live and in person.
Awesome.
Yeah,
We'll get
see you there, girl.
So
Yeah.
come hang with us.
Yeah.
Come hang
Nice.
with us.
It's gonna be
George,
fun.
and I don't know.
I think it was really interesting to have this subject.
Thank you, Caroline. Also,
And
since you
very
mentioned,
nice to have something different away from the more conventional discussions.
yes,
And
thank you.
thank you very much to the presenters and you, Alejo, for doing it.
No, please, thank you. And also, since you're saying this, actually, you are always invited to send us if you have like a subject that you think might be interesting to discuss, so we can consider it. Okay, I try to come up. We try with a board. We get together and we try to come up with themes. But everyone is welcome to send us ideas if there's something you would like us to consider. George, I don't know if you want to share something in case people want to get in touch with you, even if you're not doing consultations. I don't know.
Yeah, if you'd love to have a conversation, you can send me an email, grgcoutts@gmail.com. Other than that, I'll be under my stack of books, sort of trying to get my stuff done. But yeah, I'm happy to meet people at the conference. And if you have something that you'd like to say, send me an email.
Great, amazing. All right. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you for your comments and participation. Thank you for the people who will watch the recording. Remember, if you want to book the conference with the huge discount, you have to do it before the 30th of April. So you have 6 days, okay? Otherwise, you can still book, but it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Okay, see you everyone. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, thanks for
Bye.
coming.
Bye.
Bye.